They've released 17 studio albums, resulting in over 200 million albums sold worldwide, including Back in Black, selling 50 million copies, making it the highest-selling album in rock history. With sold-out stadiums, arenas, and concert venues over the last 40 years, and their latest album, Power Up, released in late 2020. AC/DC remains one of the greatest rock bands in the world, and we're gonna talk about it. This is For Those About to Talk, the AC/DC podcast, with your hosts Eddie Payne and Tommy Pearson.
Hey everyone, this is Eddie Payne. Welcome to For Those About to Talk, the premiere episode of the AC/DC podcast. And in the next room over there, we got the AC/DC guru himself, Mr. Tommy Pearson. What's up, Tommy?
I don't know if I can live up to that. What's up, Eddie?
Well, you know, it's back over Christmas break. I had this idea. I was like, we get together so often and we talk about AC/DC constantly. So I'm like, why not just do a podcast about it?
It's a good idea. I mean, I listen to them. I like to hear other people's opinions on AC/DC. I like to hear different opinions on AC/DC because I've got my perspective, and I like to hear yours because you're a good 10 years younger than me. So we've come to AC/DC from different eras, and then but we both have the same appreciation for them.
Do you remember like the first AC/DC song that you ever heard?
I've got a story that I tell about that, and it may be a lie. I'm not even sure, but I've told it so many times that I've come to believe it myself. But I can tell you, most of this is accurate. But the story is this: I had a friend in high school who was a year older than me, maybe a year and a half. So he had his driver's license a little bit before me, and he had an 8-track player in his Pontiac Grand Prix, a car that I wish I had had. Lovely light blue Grand Prix. This was in about, 78 or 9 or so. It must have been 79. Anyway, we would ride around in his car listening to music, and he had various 8 tracks in the car, and one day he put in AC/DC's Let There Be Rock. Now, I had never heard AC/DC to my knowledge. I'm sure that by then Highway to Hell was either out or about to come out, but I had never heard the band before. And so in my memory, and this would not be true if anybody remembers how 8-tracks work, he put the 8-track in, and in my memory, we heard the first song on it. Of course, with an 8-track, he could have been on track 2, track 3, or track 4. We might have been in the middle of the 8th song, or we might have been on track 2 and been in the middle of the 3rd song, or at the end of the 3rd song. But in my memory, it started right off with Go Down, the first song on Let There Be Rock. And I just remember thinking, wow, man, it sounded so nasty. The production on it was kind of loose, kind of rattly, not super clean like some of the stuff that was out back then, like Steely Dan or the Doobie Brothers or something. It was trashy, but it sounded good. It was good and loud, and guitars and loud drums, and fast songs and aggressive. And then Bon Scott's voice, sounded like a weasel getting strangled, man. And I was just hooked. I thought this is for me, man. And whether Highway to Hell was out already or was just coming out, that was the first AC/DC album that I went out and bought, that I had for myself. And from there, I immediately went back and got Let There Be Rock, because that was the one my friend had introduced me to. And I just moved on from there.
My story actually goes back, probably not as long as yours, but the first time I think I heard AC/DC, if I can remember right, was probably I was about 12 years old. My cousin and I got together, and he actually introduced me to all this, like, back in the mid-'80s, like hair metal rock stuff. So I actually was raised on like disco and old, like, classic country. Like, I'm talking like Kenny Rogers.
Oh, I love that too.
And Ronnie Millsap.
That's what my parents listened to. And that was on in the car all the time.
And Alabama. It's like those were like the three top artists that I grew up on. And also, coming out of the disco era in the mid to late 70s, it's like you start to transition, you start to pick up on what artists you like, and you kind of get a feel for it. And I guess that's where the music love started back in the 70s when I was growing up, because you used to hear stuff on the radio. And I remember hearing like old, like, I don't know, Kenny Rogers and some of the slower stuff, the ballady type stuff, back on like WRVA, which is a AM radio station here in Richmond. That was back when they played music. That's how long ago that was. But getting back to, I think the first, if I remember right, the first song that I heard from AC/DC coming in late was probably You Shook Me All Night Long.
Oh,
from Back in Black.
Starting right at the top.
Yeah. And actually, the first time I heard AC/DC, the first album, and I know that there were several before that, but I was trying to figure out if there were any other songs before that song that I heard, and that was the first song.
And I don't remember anything for myself. I don't remember anything before hearing my friend play the Let There Be Rock 8-track. I don't remember ever hearing them before that. And then Highway to Hell became, sort of popular. I remember hearing that on the radio. But it wasn't until Back in Black came out that, you heard them all the time on the radio. And the funny thing about, I'm from a country town, and so we didn't get all the hard rock stuff that places like Richmond got. And I've spoken to friends of mine from Chicago and Dallas and places like that, New York City, of course, L.A., all over the world. All over the country. And they had all heard AC/DC long before I did. They had heard the Let There Be Rock stuff. They had heard the Powerade stuff. They knew that stuff intimately, and I did not. So when Highway to Hell came out and I bought that became my favorite album. It's my favorite album to this day, probably because it was, right there when I was developing my love for hard rock music. And, then I went back, and in Richmond, Virginia, there was a radio station called XL102 that used to play all the hard rock stuff of the day, well, any rock kind of stuff of the day. And a football team at either J.R. Tucker or Douglas Freeman or one of those West End high schools, the football team had decided on a song that was like their song, and I guess they used to run out on the field to it. And that song happened to be TNT. Now, I'd never heard that before. That was on AC/DC's first United States album, High Voltage. And they started playing it every night. And they had a thing called the Top 10 at 10, where where they tabulated people's requests from all day and then played the top 10. And TNT was number one for, 6-8 months probably. And so I went, okay, I probably need to go get the album that's from. So I went out and bought High Voltage. Oddly, I never got Powerade. I just, for some reason, heard Let There Be Rock, bought Highway to Hell when it came out, went back and got Let There Be Rock, heard TNT on the radio repeatedly because of that football team, went back and got High Voltage, still didn't get Powerade. It was years later that I finally bought a copy of Powerade. It was probably after Flick of the Switch came out before I ever heard that album.
Oh, wow. You're going back to what you were mentioning about XL102. I actually was a DJ there in 2000 through 2004. And back when I started, it was right before the transition where they started playing all the new alternative stuff along with the classic rock. So I think they were having a kind of a identity crisis. And I remember coming in and seeing all these cool DJs, and they were just like doing their thing, and it was like nothing. And I got a chance to run the board, and for like the first couple of hours, I noticed the songs, the bands that they were playing, like the rotation, like once an hour, there was an AC/DC song. And it was like that 24 hours a day. It was like the big three artists were like AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and occasionally they throw in some weirder stuff, a lot of Journey and a lot of
Skynyrd. Was
Boston.
Skynyrd a big thing?
Yeah, Boston, the Foreplay Long Time, that was the go to the bathroom song.
Yeah.
It was like 10 minutes long or something like that.
Cashmere.
Yep, exactly. But AC/DC is like after the first 6 months, I was almost burnt out on AC/DC.
I can see that.
And I had never really listened to them from, growing up when I was talking earlier. When I was 12, there was a period where I was strictly hair metal, and then the grunge scene hit, and then it's like I was all grunge, and then I kind of was trying to figure out what I liked, and I just decided, well, I like everything, so I'm I'm just going to listen to everything. And I didn't get back into AC/DC until I got to the radio station. And then after that, when I left the radio station in like 2004, I kind of like didn't really pay attention to that side of it. I just kind of just listened to whatever. And then I guess now is a good time to transition into how you and I first met. We actually had a mutual friend post something on Facebook. He wanted to do an AC/DC tribute band. And I was like, I haven't really been into AC/DC in a long time. I hear them occasionally, but, I never really got into them that much. And I was like, well, maybe I can do this. So after about 6 months of trying to find the right people, Tommy was the first person that came along. He's like, oh, I think I can do it. I know all the AC/DC songs. And it's like he knows everything about AC/DC, so it's like, why don't we just try to put something together? And it came to fruition probably about 6 months later, where we finally had the full lineup, and we were having a struggle with singers because imitating Brian Johnson and Bon Scott, they're just
very, very hard.
It's very hard to do. So we finally found the guy, and we've been doing this 2 years now, I guess.
A little bit more than that, yeah. We've done well. Before you came along, everybody that's ever met me knows how much I love AC/DC, and any cover band that I've ever been in, we've played some AC/DC songs, and not necessarily the big ones. If I don't really need to hear another cover band version of TNT or Dirty Deeds. So those seem to be the ones that everybody does. I wanted, if I was going to play AC/DC, I wanted to do something a little bit deeper than that. So I've been in, I was in bands that did, Shot Down in Flames, and we did Girls Got Rhythm, and we did Let There Be Rock, and we did a whole lot of Rosie. We were trying to do something a little bit more than Dirty Deeds and TNT. But I had been invited to be in AC/DC tribute bands before you came along, and they all fizzled out because most people don't understand instrumentally what's going on in AC/DC. AC/DC is a simple band with easy arrangements, big, fat, easy chords, real simple drum parts. Even a dumb guitarist like myself can play. But to get the feel right, it's so hard. And I would meet with people. We'd get the 5 people together, and the person singing would sound terrible, no good at all, couldn't hit the notes, or wouldn't know the words. Or you get 5 people together to play AC/DC songs, and 2 of them don't know anything beyond the hits. It's very hard.
Hopefully, in the near future, in a future episode, we will get all the guys in here, and we'll all get together, and we can shoot the shit on AC/DC as a band, as a tribute band.
Well, I'm going to go back to when you got the job at the radio station. What year did you start there? Or did you start running the boards where you knew what was coming up every hour?
I actually started there in 2000. At the time, I believe Jay Smack was the assistant program director. And Jay Smack is a local guy here. He does a local show, Studio B. He's done it for years here in Richmond, Virginia. And I came in, wanted to be a DJ. I'd been wanting to do that since I was little, probably about 10 years old or so. I sent in my resume and didn't have a resume at that point. I just was pretty much a point of interest, and told him, this is what I want to do. I'm familiar with this and this and this, and been in bands before and know how to hook stuff up, and hopefully that would help me out. Went in and got hired pretty much on the spot, got to walk around, check the place out. I started running the board first, just kind of sitting in with the DJs. And by this point, radio's changed so much over the last 50 years. Everything's automated now. So there's no put a record here and put the needle on it and cue up the mic and all this. It's totally different than it was.
I don't mind not having to cue up the vinyl, but I do mind how homogenous classic rock radio is across the entire country. It's been destroyed by corporate radio has pretty much destroyed the DJ's ability to pick their songs. The reason I asked that is because I wanted to see how many AC/DC albums were out by the time you got hired. And I definitely understand on a classic rock radio station how you could get tired of them pretty quick. Same with, Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and this, the same old band. Skin in our area in Richmond, Virginia, Skinner, good Lord. But at least you had, the Razor's Edge album was already out. You had all the classic stuff with Bond, High Voltage and Dirty Deeds and Let There Be Rock and Highway to Hell and Back in Black. For those about to rock, had a couple of classic rock staple cuts on it. So you did have a little bit more variety to choose from, but that's why I asked, because if you had said you came in like 1991, you would have been in prime Thunderstruck, Money Talks era, but you were even later than that.
Yeah, those two were in rotation when I was on. And you named them. It was, TNT, Highway to Hell, Dirty Deeds, Back in Black occasionally, but usually on the later time.
You Shook Me All Night Long.
You Shook Me All
For
Night Long.
those about to rock.
For those about to rock, we did not play that one.
Oh, okay.
I don't recall. Maybe occasionally, but You Shook Me All Night Long was in regular rotation, and it's like TNT, Dirty Deeds were like the big two, the most popular ones. And, we didn't get any of the deep cuts. Like, for those about to rock, we rarely played that. And I don't remember hearing it anyway.
And even then, in 2000, I'll bet you didn't play a single cut, not one song from Flick of the Switch. Probably didn't play anything from Fly on the Wall.
No.
You might have played Who Made Who, the song, but not, of course, the other two songs on Who Made Who were instrumental, so that would have probably been it. Maybe Hell's Bells. Did you play Hell's Bells?
Hell's Bells was heavily rotated also.
Yeah.
And Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, that was on there a couple times, if I remember right. But yeah, the big albums, the big hits, that was pretty much all I knew.
Right.
From that point, I mean, before starting, the tribute band, it's like I had to go back and dig into the catalog to really learn these songs. I mean, we've got a list of probably 50 plus songs of their catalog.
Right.
And at the start of this band, I think I knew maybe 10 songs.
Well, you came along real fast.
Some of them were popular. And, I got to say, one of my favorite all-time songs is actually featured in a movie called Empire Records that came out in the 90s. And the one scene they go in there, they're trying to save the record store, and the owners just had enough, and he puts on a record, and he
sits down at the drums to play along.
He sits down and starts to play If You Want Blood, You Got It.
Yes,
That's one of the best movie scenes featuring an AC/DC song, and ever since that scene, my wife actually turned me on to that song, and I'm like, this is a pretty good song, and it's, I mean, in the context of that movie and that scene, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Because he's just getting out all of his aggression,
I remember the first time I saw that too, and I thought, man, that is so cool. Because, AC/DC didn't at the time sell their music to a lot of, they didn't, use it in movies too much. They never used it in commercials. Now they've come off of that a little bit. Hell, they were one of the last bands to join Spotify. They wouldn't let Spotify have their catalog. So, that was cool when Empire Records put that in there. Now I got to go watch that again just for that scene.
I know. It would be cool if somebody would do like a tribute band just for that movie called Empire Records and just play all the songs from that movie.
There's an idea. All right, so we've been talking about mainly ourselves this episode because we wanted everybody to know who we are, and we're going to talk about, of course, all kinds of different topics: the albums, the instruments, the playing style, the bands influenced by AC/DC, the bands who influenced AC/DC. Their tours, how they are live, all kinds of other stuff coming up. But one thing that we want to talk about today, we're taping this on January 6th, 2022. And for those who don't know, January 6th was Malcolm Young's birthday. He would have been 69 years old today. He died 4 years ago. He had a few health problems before he died. He had some lung problems, a lifelong chain smoker. So, that stands to reason. I believe he got a pacemaker put in close to the end. But the thing that did him in was dementia. He got dementia when he was around 60 or so, or late 50s maybe. And towards the end of his career, he was having trouble on stage. They made it through. I can't remember the name of the album that he was on. It's 3 Back, not Power Up, not Rock or Bust. The one before that.
Black Ice.
Yeah, Black Ice. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he made it through Black Ice, okay, but Angus did say that he was forgetting some of the parts, and that's when he decided to retire, and then took a swift decline. He ended up in an assisted living facility in Sydney, and he lasted there for a couple of years before his death. But I'm wearing my Malcolm Young. I'm holding this up to the mic so you can all see it. I'm wearing my Malcolm Young memorial T-shirt here from Malcolm. He's my favorite guitarist of all time. He's the guy that I play in my tribute band. And if it wasn't for Malcolm Young, I'd have never picked up a guitar. Well, probably AC/DC. I learned the difference in Malcolm and Angus later in life, but the music itself is what made me pick up guitar. And at first, I didn't even think Malcolm was doing anything. Man, I was like, "What? This other guy plays all the leads? Man, Malcolm's a waste. I can do what he's doing." And let me just tell you something: you can't. He's one of the best rhythm guitar players that ever lived, if not the best. And he wrote all of that stuff. He and Angus sat down and wrote it together, most of it. And we just want to tip our hats to Malcolm here on his birthday. We don't want to remember anything else about January 6th. But we do want to honor Malcolm and the whole band, man. We've lost Bon Scott and all the guys that used to be in the band. We've got guys to talk about in later episodes. Simon Wright, Chris Slade. We'll even talk about Dave Evans a little bit, the original singer. Bon Scott, of course. Mark Evans, the original bass player. There's a guy named Paul Gray that played bass on a couple of tours when Cliff Williams was having problems. Stevie Young, who took over from Malcolm. We're going to talk about all those guys in later episodes, but today we're thinking about Malcolm.
Let me ask you something. When was the last show that you saw from AC/DC?
I've seen every tour since Blow Up Your Video. So I started seeing AC/DC, I guess that was 86 maybe, and I've seen every tour since then.
So you saw them recently with Stevie and not Malcolm?
I saw, in 86, when I saw him on the Blow Up Your Video tour, Stevie was sitting in for Malcolm on the one show that I saw on that tour. Stevie was sitting in for Malcolm, but at that time, you couldn't even tell because Stevie had long hair.
Right.
And they dressed him, they just put him in like Malcolm used to wear, white T-shirt and jeans. He played Malcolm's gear. I didn't know it wasn't Malcolm until years later.
Really?
Did not know.
Wow.
I was on the right-hand side of the stage at that show, so I wasn't close enough to really see him. And unfortunately, plus, this was my first AC/DC show. I drank a fifth of Red Rocket wine in the parking lot before I walked in, and then, schmuck that I am, I'm not a big weed smoker or anything, but joints were being passed around. This is back in the day, kids. Don't try this at home. Joints were being passed around, and yeah, I definitely took a few hits, and I barely remember that show. I remember the intro pretty well. I remember some of the songs that they played, but to be able to discern the difference in Malcolm or Stevie at that point, I was not up to the task, I can tell you. But then I saw every tour past that, and I love Stevie. I think Stevie's great. He's got the genes. He had his own band called the Starfighters, and they had 2 albums which I've got. And he played Gretsch guitars. He only played rhythm. He was just like Malcolm, only in another band. So we'll talk about all the other guys in later episodes for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually me playing the part of Phil Rudd / Chris Slade. I actually am looking forward to talking a little bit about Phil and his style and how it kind of translates over to the way that I play. So I'm actually looking forward to doing that as well.
That was one lucky thing for me, having seen them in '86. They had Simon Wright on drums, and then later years I saw Simon Wright, Phil for a couple of tours, Chris Slade, Phil back for a couple of tours, Chris Slade. So they've gone back and forth, but at least I got to see one show with Simon Wright. And I like all their drummers, but of course I'm a Phil guy. first and foremost. But I'm glad I got to see all three of their drummers for sure, and I'm glad I got to see Malcolm before he passed. I wish I'd gotten to see Bon Scott, but I wasn't even old enough to go to shows back then. I will one regret I do have is in 1980 when Back in Black came out. I was a little bit. I was reluctant to listen to it because I knew that Bon Scott had died, and I love Bon Scott so much. So I didn't buy the record right away, and the record wasn't a hit right away. People remember it, and they go, "Oh my God, it blew the doors off when it came in." It did not. That album didn't become popular until 6-8 months, a year after it was released, and they kept coming out with singles. And it's when "You Shook Me All Night Long" was a big hit. That wasn't even the first single, I don't think. If you go, I'd have to go back and look, but it might have been either "Hell's Bells" or "Rock and Roll Like Noise Pollution" or "Back in Black," one of those. But I don't think "You Shook Me All Night Long" was the very first single. Anyway, all that's beside the point. I didn't want to go see the band with a new singer, which turned out to be a horrible, horrible mistake. It was summertime, and a friend of mine from high school who was 15 years old at the time, I was 16, called me up and over the summer, and he said, "Hey, I've got tickets to see AC/DC in Norfolk," I believe it was. And he goes, "You can have the ticket. All I want you to do is drive. I'll pay for the gas. All you got to do is drive us down there, and everything is taken care of." And I said no, because I wasn't interested in seeing them with their new singer, and I did not own the Back in Black album yet. So that album was blasting out of every car for the whole summer long. And, of course, I eventually started finding things about it that I liked, and I eventually went out and bought it, and I eventually recognized it for the masterpiece that it is, and I've regretted not going to that show ever since. I've got a book that talks about their tours, and that Norfolk show, I can't remember what the arena was they played. It wasn't the Scope. It was some other smaller place. It was like a 6,000 seater or something, and they only sold like 2,500 or 2,800 tickets, and so I passed up that show. Dumb me.
Well, so did you know at the time who Geordie was?
I did not. No, I did not. But in subsequent, after the it was very quick that the band announced that Brian Johnson had the gig in I think he was announced on April 1st. And the dang album came out in like May or June. So, I mean, he was announced, they went down and recorded it, they put it out. Man, it was fast. It was very fast. And I had not heard of Geordie, but when magazines like Cream and Circus and Hit Parade and those types of magazines, when they started covering the band's singer transition and talking about them recording the new album, and then when the new album came out, reviewing it and stuff, they would mention this guy's from Geordie, this guy's from Geordie. And the story back then, and I don't know if it's true or not, the story back then was that a fan from Chicago got in touch with AC/DC and said, "Hey, I know the guy you guys should get." They were trying out singers. They tried out Stevie Wright from the Easy Beats down in Australia, who had played with their Angus and Malcolm's older brother George. They tried out Alan Fryer, who was in a band called Heaven, and I think it leaked that Alan Fryer got the gig. He did not, obviously. And those Heaven records are pretty good, though. You should give those a shot if you get a chance. Interestingly, years later, after Mark Evans was booted out of AC/DC, he went and joined Heaven. So instead of the singer from Heaven getting the gig in AC/DC, AC/DC's ex-bass player got the gig in Heaven. Anyway, and there was some other, they considered Noddy Holder of Slade, who would have been a weird choice, but AC/DC has glam roots. I mean, people don't like to acknowledge it, but back in the very beginning, they dressed flamboyantly, and they had a glamish sound before they went straight up rock. So, I mean, you listen to a song like "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl?" It's like a cross between glam rock and the Easy Beats, their older brother George's band. If you listen to the song "Friday on My Mind," it's got a lot of complex single note guitar play, and it just like the riffs in "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl," which is the first song that Angus and Malcolm ever wrote for AC/DC. So you can see all those similarities there.
Isn't that song kind of creepy in a way?
It's very creepy. Yeah. I don't think they would do that today, man. But it's a little creepy.
I guess it just depends on how you look at it.
They don't
read into it.
They don't outright mention the girl's age. That's one good thing. I mean, hey, if a 21-year-old guy meets a 20-year-old girl in the line at the theater and wants to sit next to her, that's one thing. But if it was the guys from AC/DC, they were meeting a 15-year-old girl, that's a whole nother thing. Yeah. That's no good. So it wasn't that. They never mentioned that.
All right, I think we're going to wrap this episode up. I appreciate you sticking around for this, 30-minute long ramble of AC/DC and nonsense and trying to get to know us and stuff. I am Eddie Payne, and this is my co-host, Tommy Pearson, and we will see you next time. For those about to talk, the AC/DC podcast has been produced and hosted by Eddie Payne, along with co-host Tommy Pearson. Show intro voiceover by Jerry James. If you enjoyed today's podcast, follow us on Facebook at the AC/DC Podcast. Also on Instagram at For Those About to Talk, the AC/DC Podcast. For Those About to Talk, the AC/DC Podcast is on the following platforms: Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Just search For Those About to Talk, the AC/DC Podcast. For video of today's podcast, please join us on YouTube. Just search For Those About to Talk, the AC/DC Podcast. Thank you for listening and watching. We hope you'll join us again soon.